My name is Connor Walsh, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life mapped out. At 31, I was a senior software engineer at TechFlow Solutions in downtown Seattle, pulling in a solid six-figure salary developing cloud infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies. I owned a beautiful craftsman-style house in the Ballard neighborhood, drove a reliable Honda Accord, and had been in what I believed was a solid relationship with my girlfriend of 2 years, Rebecca Chen. The house was my pride and joy, a 1920s craftsman that I'd spent 3 years renovating room by room. Original hardwood floors that I'd restored myself, a kitchen I'd gutted and rebuilt with custom cabinets, and a basement workshop where I spent weekends building furniture and tinkering with electronics. More importantly, it was mine. The mortgage was in my name alone, paid for with money I'd saved during 5 years of living like a monk while building my career. Rebecca had moved in 8 months ago after her lease expired. It seemed like the natural next step in our relationship, and I was happy to have her there. She was a marketing coordinator at a local non-profit, passionate about environmental causes, with an infectious laugh and the kind of energy that made everything feel more vibrant. But looking back now, I can see the warning signs I chose to ignore. It started small. Comments about how I spent my free time, suggestions that I was too focused on work, complaints that I didn't prioritize our relationship enough. When I'd come home from a particularly challenging day debugging server configurations, Rebecca would roll her eyes and say something like, "Another late night saving the digital world, huh?" Then there were the friends. Rebecca had introduced me to her circle, mostly creative types from the non-profit world who viewed my tech career with barely concealed disdain. Marcus, her best friend from college, was particularly vocal about how corporate tech bros were destroying authentic human connection. During dinner parties at our house, I'd find myself defending not just my career, but my entire approach to life. "Connor's so focused on optimizing everything," Rebecca would say with a laugh that felt increasingly sharp. "He treats relationships like code that needs to be debugged." I tried to be understanding. Rebecca came from a family of artists and activists. Her father was a poet, her mother ran a community art center, and I knew my methodical, problem-solving approach to life sometimes clashed with her more spontaneous nature. The real problem started 2 months ago when I got promoted to lead systems architect. The new role came with a 30% salary increase, but also significantly more responsibility. I was managing a team of 12 engineers, overseeing multiple client implementations, and dealing with the kind of high-stakes technical challenges that could make or break multi-million-dollar contracts. "You're never present anymore," Rebecca complained one evening as I worked on my laptop after dinner. "Even when you're here, you're thinking about servers and databases and whatever else is more important than us." "This promotion is important, Becca. It's what we've been working toward. The extra money means we can start thinking about marriage, maybe buying a bigger place." "I never asked for a bigger place, Connor. I asked for a boyfriend who actually wants to spend time with me." The fights became more frequent and more intense. Rebecca accused me of prioritizing work over everything else, of being emotionally unavailable, of treating our relationship like another project to manage rather than something to experience. I defended myself by pointing out that I was building something meaningful, that my work supported the life we were trying to create together. But the real breaking point came 3 weeks ago, during what should have been a romantic weekend getaway to the San Juan Islands. I'd planned the trip carefully, a bed and breakfast on Orcas Island, whale-watching tours, romantic dinners overlooking the water. But on Friday afternoon, just as we were about to leave for the ferry, my phone rang. It was my manager, Patricia, calling about a critical system failure at one of our biggest clients. "Connor, I'm sorry to call, but we have a major problem. The entire customer database at Morrison Industries is down, and they're threatening to pull their contract if we can't get it resolved by Monday morning." I looked at Rebecca, who was standing by the door with our weekend bags, her expression already shifting to that familiar look of disappointment and frustration. "Can't someone else handle it?" I asked, knowing the answer. You designed the architecture. You're the only one who understands the system well enough to diagnose the problem quickly. I spent the entire weekend on my laptop, working from the bed and breakfast, while Rebecca sat on the deck reading and pointedly ignoring me. We barely spoke during the ferry ride home, and when I finally solved the problem Sunday evening, saving the company a $2 million contract, Rebecca's response was cold silence. I'm proud of what I do, I told her that night. I'm good at it, and it matters. Why can't you see that? Because you care more about being good at your job than you do about being good to me, she replied, and something in her voice suggested this conversation was different from all the others. 2 weeks ago, Rebecca announced she was taking some space to think about what she really wanted. She'd been staying at her friend Sarah's apartment, coming by occasionally to pick up clothes or mail, but avoiding any serious conversations about where our relationship was heading. I threw myself into work even harder, partly to distract myself from the uncertainty, and partly because I genuinely loved what I did. The Morrison Industries crisis had led to 3 new contract opportunities, and I was developing an innovative load balancing system that could revolutionize how we handled high-traffic implementations. Last Tuesday felt like any other day. I left for work at 7:30 a.m. after my usual routine. Coffee, quick scan of overnight system alerts, 20-minute drive through Seattle traffic to our downtown office. The Morrison Industries project was entering its final testing phase, and I spent the morning running stress tests and optimizing performance metrics. Around noon, I got a text from Rebecca. We need to talk tonight. I'll be at the house at 7. My stomach dropped. After 2 weeks of silence, a formal meeting request felt ominous, but I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe the space had helped her realize what we had together was worth fighting for. I spent the afternoon distracted, running through different scenarios of how the conversation might go. By 6 p.m., I was ready to leave the office and face whatever Rebecca had decided. The drive home through the Ballard streets felt longer than usual. I pulled into my driveway at 6:45 p.m., noting that Rebecca's car wasn't there yet, which was fine. She'd always run a few minutes late. But when I walked up to my front door and tried to insert my key, it wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe the lock was sticking. The key went in but wouldn't rotate. Confused, I examined the lock more closely and realized with growing shock that it wasn't the same lock that had been there that morning. The hardware was completely different. A new deadbolt with unfamiliar brass finish, clearly installed recently. My first thought was that there had been some kind of break-in, that someone had damaged the original lock and Rebecca had arranged for emergency repairs. But as I walked around the house checking other entry points, I found that every lock had been changed. Front door, back door, basement entrance, all new hardware that my keys couldn't open. I was standing in my own driveway, locked out of my own house, trying to process what was happening. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. I'm sorry, Connor. I can't do this anymore. I've moved my things out, and I think it's best if we don't see each other for a while. I'll mail you your spare key. The reality hit me like a physical blow. Rebecca hadn't just moved out. She had changed the locks to prevent me from entering my own home, the house I owned, the mortgage I paid, the space I'd spent years renovating with my own hands. I called her immediately, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. Rebecca, what the hell is going on? You changed the locks on my house? Connor, I needed to make a clean break. I couldn't handle another drawn-out conversation where we just repeat the same arguments. You locked me out of my own house, the house that I own, that I pay for. I know it seems extreme, but I needed space to think, and I knew if you could just come home and act like everything was normal, we'd never actually resolve anything. I was pacing the sidewalk in front of my house, neighbors probably watching through their windows as I had what looked like a public breakdown. Rebecca, you can't just change the locks on someone else's property. That's illegal. I called a locksmith. I told him I lived here and had lost my keys. It's not illegal if I'm a resident. But you're not a resident. You never signed a lease. You're not on the mortgage. You have no legal right to change anything about this house. Connor, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I just need some time to figure things out. The call ended, leaving me standing alone on my own property, unable to enter my own home. I spent that night in a hotel, lying awake and trying to understand how my life had imploded so completely in the span of a few hours. Rebecca had essentially taken my house hostage to force a relationship conversation, and I had no idea how to respond. But as the initial shock faded, it was replaced by something colder and more focused than anger. Rebecca had made a serious mistake. She'd assumed that because I was patient and accommodating in our relationship, I wouldn't know how to fight back when she crossed a legal line. She was about to learn that being a software engineer meant I was very good at solving complex problems, especially when I had time and motivation to research all the available options. By Thursday morning, I had a plan. Wednesday morning found me sitting in a downtown Seattle Starbucks at 6 a.m., my laptop open and 3 legal websites bookmarked, trying to understand exactly what Rebecca had done and what my options were for responding. I'd barely slept in the hotel room, my mind racing between disbelief and a growing determination to handle this situation properly. The first thing I'd done was call in sick to work, something I'd never done unless I was actually hospitalized. Patricia had been understanding but concerned, especially given the timing with the Morrison Industries project entering its critical phase. "Connor, take whatever time you need," she'd said, "but keep me posted if this affects your availability for the client presentation on Friday." I'd assured her I'd be back by Friday, but privately, I wasn't sure how long this would take to resolve. My research into Washington state landlord-tenant law was both enlightening and infuriating. Rebecca's status in my house was legally complicated. She'd been living there for 8 months, but had never signed a lease agreement, never paid rent, and wasn't on the mortgage or any utility bills. In most jurisdictions, she would be considered a guest rather than a tenant, which meant she had no legal right to change locks or prevent my access to my own property. But the situation was muddied by the fact that she'd established residency. She received mail at the address, had her driver's license updated to my address, and could reasonably claim that our romantic relationship created an implicit housing arrangement. I called 3 different attorneys that morning, explaining the situation and asking about my options. The responses were consistent. Rebecca had likely committed a form of trespassing or unlawful exclusion, but the remedy would probably require going through formal legal channels rather than simply calling the police. "The challenge," explained Jennifer Harrison, the 3rd attorney I spoke with, "is that domestic situations like this are rarely black and white. If you call the police, they're going to see this as a relationship dispute rather than a clear-cut property crime. But it's my house. My name is on the deed, on the mortgage, on every utility bill. Absolutely, and that gives you strong legal standing. But the fact that she was living there with your permission complicates the immediate enforcement. The best approach is probably to file for emergency relief through the courts, essentially asking a judge to order her to restore your access to your own property." Jennifer outlined the process. File a motion for emergency relief, demonstrate that I was the sole legal owner of the property, show that Rebecca had no legal right to exclude me, and request an immediate court order requiring her to restore my access. "How long does that take?" I asked. "If we file today and request emergency consideration, we could potentially get a hearing as early as Friday. The key is documenting everything, the ownership records, the timeline of events, any communication where she acknowledges that it's your property." I spent the rest of Wednesday gathering documentation, property deeds, mortgage statements, utility bills, insurance records, everything that proved my sole ownership of the house. I also screenshotted all of Rebecca's text messages, including several where she referred to Connor's house or mentioned that she was staying at Connor's place. Door. The most damaging evidence came from Rebecca's own social media. 8 months ago, when she'd first moved in, she'd posted on Facebook, "So grateful that Connor is letting me stay at his beautiful house while I figure out my next steps. Blessed, grateful heart." By Thursday morning, I was sitting in Jennifer Harrison's law office with a thick folder of documentation and a clear understanding of what needed to happen. "This is excellent preparation," Jennifer said, reviewing my materials. The ownership documentation is ironclad, and her own communications clearly establish that she understood this was your property, not a shared residence. "So we can get the court order?" "I'm confident we can. The question is whether you want to pursue just the immediate relief, getting your access restored, or if you want to address the broader legal violations." "What do you mean?" Jennifer pulled out a legal pad and started sketching the various claims I could potentially make. "Unlawful exclusion from your own property, conversion of personal property if she's prevented you from accessing your belongings, potentially even harassment depending on her motivations. If you wanted to pursue damages, you could claim costs for hotel stays, locksmith fees to restore access, legal fees, and potentially punitive damages for the deliberate nature of her actions." I thought about that. The hotel costs weren't significant, and I could afford the legal fees. But there was something appealing about the idea of Rebecca facing real consequences for what she'd done. "What would you recommend? File for the emergency relief first. Get your access restored. Then we can evaluate whether to pursue additional claims based on how she responds to the court order." We spent the next 2 hours preparing the motion for emergency relief. Jennifer was thorough, crafting language that clearly established my ownership rights while avoiding inflammatory characterizations of Rebecca's behavior that might make me look vindictive. "The key is appearing reasonable but firm," Jennifer explained. "We want the judge to see this as a straightforward property rights issue, not a messy relationship dispute." The motion requested 3 things: immediate restoration of my access to my property, prohibition against Rebecca making any further changes to the locks or security systems, and an order requiring her to return any copies of keys she might have made. We filed the motion Thursday afternoon with a request for an emergency hearing on Friday morning. Jennifer was optimistic about our chances. "Property rights are taken very seriously, especially in cases like this, where the ownership is undisputed. Unless Rebecca has some compelling explanation for her actions, the judge should grant our request." Thursday evening, I decided to make one more attempt to resolve things directly with Rebecca. I called her from my hotel room, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "Rebecca, I've spent the day talking to attorneys about this situation. I want to give you a chance to resolve it before we have to go to court. Connor, I told you I need space to think. Why can't you respect that?" "Because you locked me out of my own house. Rebecca, you have no legal right to change those locks. You're not a tenant, you're not on the lease, your name isn't on anything related to that property. I lived there for 8 months. That has to count for something. It counts for something in terms of our relationship, but it doesn't give you property rights. You can't just take someone's house hostage because you want to avoid a difficult conversation." There was a long pause. "What do you mean, attorneys?" "I mean, I've filed a motion in court asking a judge to order you to restore my access to my own property. The hearing is tomorrow morning." "You're taking me to court over a relationship problem?" "Rebecca, this stopped being a relationship problem when you committed what's basically a property crime. I'm trying to give you a chance to fix this before a judge gets involved." "I can't believe you're being this vindictive. I'm just trying to protect myself emotionally." "By stealing my house? Rebecca, do you understand how serious this is? You could be facing criminal charges for unlawful exclusion." Another long pause. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to call a locksmith right now, tonight, and have them change the locks back to the original configuration. I want my keys to work in my house by tomorrow morning." "And then what? We go back to pretending everything is fine?" Then we have whatever conversation you wanted to have, but we have it like adults, not with you holding my property hostage. I need to think about this. Rebecca, the hearing is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. If you fix this tonight, I can call the attorney and cancel the court proceeding. If you don't, then we'll let the judge sort it out. The call ended without resolution, but I could tell Rebecca was starting to understand the seriousness of what she'd done. Friday morning arrived grey and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that matched my mood. Jennifer had called at 8 a.m. to confirm that Rebecca hadn't contacted her about resolving the situation, which meant we were proceeding with the court hearing. "Are you ready for this?" Jennifer asked as we met outside the courthouse. "I'm ready to get my house back." The King County Courthouse was busy even on a Friday morning, with attorneys and clients rushing between courtrooms and clerks processing paperwork. Our hearing was scheduled in front of Judge Patricia Williams, who Jennifer described as no-nonsense, but fair. Judge Williams doesn't like her time wasted, so she'll want to hear the facts quickly and make a decision. Be prepared to answer questions directly and factually. As we waited outside the courtroom, I caught sight of Rebecca walking down the hallway with a man I didn't recognize, presumably her attorney. She looked tired and stressed, which gave me a strange mixture of satisfaction and regret. When our case was called, Judge Williams reviewed the motion quickly and looked up with an expression that suggested she'd seen similar situations before. "Mr. Walsh, this is your property?" "Yes, Your Honor, I'm the sole owner. I have the deed, the mortgage, and all utility bills in my name." "And Ms. Chen was living there with your permission?" "Yes, Your Honor. She moved in 8 months ago when her lease expired. There was no formal rental agreement." Judge Williams turned to Rebecca's attorney. "What's your client's position on this?" Rebecca's attorney, a young man who looked like he'd been practicing for about 5 minutes, stood up nervously. "Your Honor, my client established residency at the property and has legitimate concerns about her safety and emotional well-being. She changed the locks as a temporary measure while she determines her living situation." Judge Williams looked skeptical. "Did she have permission from the property owner to change the locks?" "Well, no, Your Honor, but she was a resident and felt threatened." "Threatened how?" The attorney shuffled through his notes. "Emotionally threatened by the dynamics of the relationship." Judge Williams turned back to me. "Mr. Walsh, did you threaten Ms. Chen in any way?" "No, Your Honor. We had relationship disagreements, but I never threatened her physically or otherwise." "Ms. Chen," Judge Williams addressed Rebecca directly, "do you have any evidence that Mr. Walsh posed a physical threat to your safety?" Rebecca stood up slowly. "No, Your Honor, but the relationship was emotionally difficult and I needed space to think." "I understand relationship difficulties, Ms. Chen, but that doesn't give you the right to exclude the property owner from his own home. This is a clear-cut property rights issue." Judge Williams spent about 30 seconds reviewing the documentation Jennifer had submitted. "Mr. Walsh, I'm granting your motion for emergency relief. Ms. Chen, you are hereby ordered to immediately restore Mr. Walsh's access to his property. This means either providing him with keys that work in the current locks or having the locks changed back to their original configuration at your expense." She looked at both of us sternly. "This order is effective immediately. Ms. Chen, you have until 5 p.m. today to comply. If Mr. Walsh cannot access his property by 5 p.m., you will be in contempt of court." Rebecca's attorney started to object, but Judge Williams cut him off. "Counselor, your client has no legal standing to exclude the property owner from his own home. The relationship dynamics are irrelevant to the property rights issue. Make sure she understands the seriousness of a contempt finding." As we left the courtroom, I felt a mixture of vindication and anticipation. Rebecca had until 5 p.m. to restore my access, but something told me this wasn't going to be as simple as getting my keys back. I was about to learn just how right that instinct was. The clock on my hotel room desk read 4:47 p.m. and my phone had been silent all afternoon. No call from Rebecca, no text from her attorney, no indication that she planned to comply with Judge Williams' order. In 13 minutes, she would officially be in contempt of court. I'd spent the day in a strange state of suspended animation, caught between anticipation and anxiety. Jennifer had warned me that even with a court order, enforcement could be complicated. Some people think court orders are suggestions rather than commands, she'd explained after we left the courthouse. If Rebecca doesn't comply by 5 p.m., we'll need to involve the sheriff's office to enforce the order. At 4:55 p.m., I drove to my house in Ballard, hoping to find that Rebecca had quietly complied without contacting me. But as I pulled into my driveway, I could see immediately that nothing had changed. The new brass deadbolt gleamed in the late afternoon sun, mocking me with its unfamiliarity. I tried my key anyway, knowing it wouldn't work, but needing to confirm the situation. The key slid in, but wouldn't turn, just as it had for the past 3 days. At exactly 5:01 p.m., I called Jennifer. "She didn't comply," I reported. "The locks are still changed, and I haven't heard anything from her." "Okay, we proceed to enforcement. I'll contact the sheriff's office and request that they assist with enforcing the court order. Usually they can send a deputy out tonight or first thing tomorrow morning." "How does that work?" "The deputy will serve Rebecca with a copy of the court order and give her a final opportunity to comply immediately. If she refuses, they can arrest her for contempt, and we can arrange for a locksmith to restore your access." The thought of Rebecca being arrested felt both satisfying and unsettling. Part of me wanted to see her face real consequences for what she'd done, but another part hoped she would simply comply and end this entire ordeal. "There's another option," Jennifer continued. "We could file a motion for contempt on Monday and let the judge handle the enforcement. That gives Rebecca the weekend to comply voluntarily. What do you recommend?" "Honestly, I think she's testing whether you're serious about enforcing your rights. If you give her more time, she might interpret that as weakness and continue to stall." I thought about the past 3 days of sleeping in hotels, the stress of being locked out of my own home, the way Rebecca had dismissed my concerns as if my property rights were irrelevant. "Let's proceed with enforcement tonight." By 7 p.m., Deputy Sheriff Maria Rodriguez was standing in my driveway, reviewing the court order while I explained the situation. Deputy Rodriguez was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd clearly dealt with similar domestic property disputes before. "So you own this house. She was living here as a guest, and she changed the locks without permission after you two broke up." "That's correct. Judge Williams ordered her to restore my access by 5 p.m. today, and she hasn't complied. Do you know where she's staying now?" "I believe she's at her friend Sarah's apartment, but I have her cell phone number." Deputy Rodriguez nodded and pulled out her phone. "I'll call her and explain that she needs to come here immediately to comply with the court order. If she refuses or doesn't show up within a reasonable time, we'll proceed with contempt enforcement." The call lasted about 5 minutes, with Deputy Rodriguez explaining the situation calmly but firmly. I could hear Rebecca's voice through the phone, sounding agitated and argumentative. "Ms. Chen, I understand your concerns about the relationship, but this is a legal matter now. You have a court order requiring you to restore access to Mr. Walsh's property. You need to be here within the next hour with keys or a locksmith, or you'll be arrested for contempt of court." After she hung up, Deputy Rodriguez turned to me. "She's coming, but she's not happy about it. She'll be here in about 30 minutes with keys to the current locks." Those 30 minutes felt like hours. I sat on my front steps, my own front steps, waiting for Rebecca to arrive and restore my access to my own home. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me. Rebecca's Honda Civic pulled into the driveway at 7:43 p.m. She got out slowly, holding a set of keys and looking like she was walking to her own execution. Behind her was Sarah Martinez, her friend whose apartment she'd been staying at. "Rebecca, Deputy Rodriguez said professionally. "Do you have keys that will allow Mr. Walsh access to his property?" Rebecca nodded silently and approached the front door. Her hands were shaking as she unlocked the deadbolt, then the door handle. "The locks work," she said quietly. I need to get some of my things that are still inside." "You can collect your personal belongings," Deputy Rodriguez agreed, "but you cannot remove anything that belongs to Mr. Walsh or that was part of the household when he lived here." I followed Rebecca into my house for the first time in 3 days and immediately felt a mixture of relief and violation. Everything looked the same. My furniture, my renovations, my carefully organized workspace. But somehow it felt contaminated by what had happened. Rebecca moved quickly through the house, gathering clothes and personal items while avoiding eye contact with me. Sarah helped her carry things to the car, shooting me hostile glances, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. "Rebecca," I said, as she was loading the last box into her car, "why didn't you just talk to me? Why did it have to come to this?" She stopped and looked at me for the first time that evening, her eyes red with tears. "Because talking to you is like talking to a computer, Connor. Everything has to be logical. Everything has to be optimized. You never just feel anything or let yourself be vulnerable. So you stole my house. I didn't steal anything. I needed to feel like I had some control over the situation. By taking away all of my control, Rebecca closed her car door without responding. As she drove away, Deputy Rodriguez handed me the keys to my own home. "Mr. Walsh, I recommend you change these locks again as soon as possible. She could have made copies, and you want to ensure your security going forward." After Deputy Rodriguez left, I stood alone in my house, trying to process what had just happened. The silence felt different than it had before Rebecca moved in, not peaceful, but empty. I walked through each room, checking to make sure nothing was missing or damaged. Everything seemed to be in order, but I noticed small things that reminded me of the life we'd shared here. A coffee mug in the kitchen sink that Rebecca had used that Tuesday morning before everything changed. A book she'd been reading left on the nightstand in what had become our bedroom. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Hope everything is okay. Client presentation moved to Monday morning. Take the weekend to rest." I typed back, "Thanks. Looking forward to getting back to normal." But as I sat in my living room that night, I realized that normal was going to be something different than what I'd had before. The house felt bigger and quieter without Rebecca's presence, but it also felt completely mine again in a way that was both liberating and lonely. Saturday morning, I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed again, this time to high-security deadbolts that would be much harder to tamper with. I also had a security system installed, more for peace of mind than from any real concern about Rebecca returning. But the most surprising thing happened on Sunday afternoon. I was in my workshop, working on a bookshelf project I'd started before the relationship drama began, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see a man I didn't recognize holding what looked like legal documents. "Mr. Walsh? I'm a process server. I have documents for you." The documents were a lawsuit filed by Rebecca, claiming that I had violated her rights as a residential tenant by having her unlawfully evicted without proper notice. She was seeking $15,000 in damages for emotional distress, temporary housing costs, and violation of tenant rights. I called Jennifer immediately. "She's suing me after she illegally changed my locks?" "It's a common tactic," Jennifer explained. "File a counter-suit to muddy the waters and try to establish that she had legitimate tenancy rights. Don't worry, her claim is weak, and we have plenty of evidence to defend against it." "What do we need to do?" "First, we respond to her lawsuit with our own counterclaims: unlawful exclusion, conversion, harassment, legal fees, and punitive damages. If she wants to make this a legal battle, we'll give her one." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Rebecca had just made the biggest mistake of this entire ordeal. By suing me, she'd opened herself up to much more serious legal consequences than simply complying with the court order would have entailed. I'd tried to handle this situation reasonably, giving her opportunities to resolve things without escalating to legal action. But if Rebecca wanted to fight this in court, I was prepared to show her exactly what happened when someone with my resources and determination decided to pursue justice systematically. The software engineer in me appreciated the challenge of building a comprehensive legal case. And unlike debugging code, this problem had a human element that made success feel deeply personal. 3 months later, I was sitting in Jennifer Harrison's law office, reviewing the final settlement agreement that would end the legal battle Rebecca had started with her lawsuit. The morning Seattle rain drummed against the windows, but inside, everything felt clear and resolved. "This is better than I expected when we started," Jennifer said, spreading the settlement documents across her conference table. Rebecca's attorney finally convinced her that pursuing this case would be financial suicide. The numbers on the settlement were significant. Rebecca would pay me $8,500 to cover my legal fees, hotel costs during the lockout, the expense of changing locks twice, security system installation, and punitive damages for the unlawful exclusion. More importantly, she would sign a comprehensive release, admitting that she had no legal claim to my property and agreeing never to contact me again, except through attorneys if necessary. "What changed her mind?" I asked, reviewing the terms one more time. "Discovery," Jennifer replied with satisfaction. "Once we started the formal legal process, we had the right to demand all her communications, financial records, and social media posts related to the incident. Her own evidence destroyed her case. The discovery process had revealed things I never knew about Rebecca's planning and motivations. Text messages with her friends showing that she'd planned to change the locks days before she actually did it. Facebook posts describing her strategy to take control of the situation and show Connor what it feels like to be powerless. Most damaging of all, a conversation with her friend Marcus, where she'd explicitly stated that she knew she had no legal right to change the locks, but didn't care because Connor wouldn't do anything about it. "Her biggest mistake was underestimating you," Jennifer continued. "She thought you'd be too passive or too concerned about family drama to pursue strong legal action." Rebecca's lawsuit had backfired spectacularly. Instead of establishing tenant rights, the legal process had created a permanent record of her unlawful behavior. Instead of gaining leverage in our relationship dispute, she'd face the possibility of significant financial penalties and even criminal charges. But the real turning point had come 6 weeks ago when Rebecca's own attorney had recommended that she settle. I'd learned about this through Jennifer, who'd spoken with Rebecca's lawyer after a particularly disastrous deposition. Apparently, Rebecca had performed poorly under questioning, contradicting her own written statements and becoming emotional when pressed about her motivations. Her attorney told me that Rebecca broke down during the deposition, Jennifer had reported. She admitted that changing the locks was motivated by wanting to hurt Connor the way he'd hurt her emotionally, and that she knew it was legally wrong but felt justified because of their relationship problems. That admission had destroyed any remaining credibility for her tenant rights claim. You can't simultaneously argue that you had legitimate housing rights and that you violated property laws intentionally to cause emotional harm. The settlement we were finalizing today represented complete vindication of my position. Rebecca would face real financial consequences for her actions, publicly acknowledge that she'd acted unlawfully, and commit to staying out of my life permanently. "There's one more thing," Jennifer said, pulling out an additional document. "Rebecca's attorney asked me to give you this." It was a handwritten letter from Rebecca, her first direct communication since the night Deputy Rodriguez had enforced the court order. "Connor, I know this letter won't fix anything, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how seriously wrong I was. When I changed those locks, I was angry and hurt, And I wanted you to feel as powerless as I felt in our relationship. But I realize now that what I was feeling in our relationship was my own insecurity and fear, not something you were doing to me. You were always honest about your priorities and your approach to life. I knew who you were when we started dating, and it wasn't fair for me to try to change you or punish you for being yourself. I also understand now that what I did wasn't just mean. It was illegal and could have had serious consequences for both of us. I'm grateful that you handled it through proper legal channels instead of doing something that could have hurt me worse. I hope someday you can remember the good parts of what we had together, even though I ruined everything with my behavior at the end. Rebecca, I read the letter twice, feeling a complicated mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and closure. Rebecca had finally acknowledged what I'd been trying to explain from the beginning, that her actions had crossed legal and ethical lines that had nothing to do with our relationship problems. "How do you want to handle this?" Jennifer asked. "You're not required to respond." "I think the settlement agreement is response enough," I said, folding the letter and putting it in my jacket pocket. "She's taken responsibility, and that's what matters." We spent another hour finalizing the settlement details and discussing the implementation timeline. Rebecca would wire the payment within 10 days, sign the final release agreement, and our legal entanglement would be officially over. As I left Jennifer's office that afternoon, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that Tuesday evening when I discovered my key wouldn't open my own front door. The immediate crisis had been resolved within a week, but the legal battle had taken 3 months to fully conclude. During that time, I'd learned things about myself, about Rebecca, and about the importance of standing up for my rights that I probably wouldn't have learned any other way. My work at TechFlow had actually benefited from the experience. Having to manage a complex legal situation while maintaining my professional responsibilities had sharpened my project management skills and my ability to compartmentalize stress. The Morrison Industries implementation had been a huge success, leading to a promotion to senior systems architect and a significant increase in both salary and responsibility. More surprisingly, the ordeal had led to an unexpected romantic development. Jennifer Harrison, my attorney, had asked me out for coffee 2 weeks after the case was settled. What had started as a professional relationship had evolved into something personal, built on mutual respect and shared appreciation for logical problem-solving. "You know what I found most attractive about you during this whole process?" Jennifer had said during our third date. "You never let emotion override good judgment. Even when Rebecca was being completely unreasonable, you handled everything systematically and fairly. It was ironic that the qualities Rebecca had criticized in me, my methodical approach, my focus on logical solutions, my tendency to treat problems as systems to be optimized, were exactly what Jennifer valued. That evening, I was back in my house in Ballard, working on the bookshelf project I'd started before the lockout incident. The workshop felt peaceful and productive, filled with the smell of wood shavings and the satisfaction of creating something tangible with my hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Dinner tomorrow to celebrate the settlement? I'll cook. You can bring wine and tell me about your latest furniture project." I typed back, "Perfect. Looking forward to it." As I applied wood stain to the bookshelf, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Rebecca's decision to change my locks had been intended to hurt me, to make me feel powerless and excluded. Instead, it had forced me to discover that I was much stronger and more resilient than either of us had realized. The lockout had lasted 3 days. The legal battle had lasted 3 months, but the lessons I'd learned about standing up for myself, about the importance of clear boundaries, and about my own capacity for systematic problem-solving under pressure would last much longer. Sometimes, the worst thing someone can do to you ends up being the catalyst for positive changes you never would have made otherwise. Rebecca had tried to lock me out of my own house. Instead, she'd locked herself out of my life permanently, while forcing me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed. The bookshelf was coming together beautifully, each joint fitting perfectly, each measurement precise and purposeful. Just like the legal strategy that had resolved the crisis, and just like the new life I was building with someone who appreciated rather than criticized my approach to solving problems. Looking back, I realized that the moment I discovered my key wouldn't turn in my own front door had been the beginning of something much better than what I'd lost. Rebecca had gambled that I would be too passive or too concerned about maintaining peace to fight back effectively. She'd learned that methodical, systematic people can be far more dangerous opponents than emotional, impulsive ones. We just take longer to get started. But once we do get started, we tend to be very, very thorough. The security system I'd installed after regaining access to my house had never detected any unauthorized visits. The new high-security locks had never been tampered with. Rebecca had kept her word about staying away, just as I'd kept my word about pursuing legal remedies rather than personal revenge. As I finished the final coat of stain on the bookshelf, I reflected that this piece of furniture would outlast most relationships, most jobs, and most of the drama that seemed so important in the moment, but faded with time. Some problems require emotional solutions. Others require logical ones. The key is knowing which approach fits which situation and having the courage to follow through completely. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, but I'd learned it thoroughly, and that knowledge would serve me well for whatever challenges lay ahead.